Hello everybody, welcome back to today's video. Today we are going to be going over, in my opinion, what are the top 5 governors' mansions that are most likely to flip. I'm not saying they are going to flip, but which governor's elections, they're all going to be competitive in this case. They're regardless of who's in power, or who has the momentum, I should say. They're all going to be competitive. In today's video, I'm going to be going over which top 5 are at the highest risk of flipping for either party, which means that if it's currently held by a Democrat governor, it would flip to a Republican. If it's currently held by a Republican governor, then it would flip to a Democrat. So I'm going to be going over the top 5 governor's elections that I think are at the highest risk of flipping. So I guess we'll get right into it right now. We'll start with the top 5. So I will start with Georgia right here. It is currently listed at top 5 most likely to flip. So why do I have it as it is? Well, Georgia, as you know, is a very competitive state. Typically, Republicans do better at the statewide level. You have Brian Kemp, their Republican governor, who is term limited. He won by around 7 or 8 points in 2022, which is pretty impressive for him. Republicans hold the other statewide offices like Lieutenant Governor, Attorney General, Secretary of State. They control the state legislature by quite a lot. However, they have been losing some momentum in recent years. Democrats control both U.S. Senate seats, John Ossoff and Raphael Warnock, and they did pretty well in 2025 in the off-year elections. They were able to flip a few statewide races, which affected the utility board or something. I think something like that. That commission is still held by Republicans majority. However, Democrats are gaining momentum, and you recently saw that in 2020 you saw Joe Biden narrowly able to capture the state. It did go back to Donald Trump in 2024, but it wasn't by the margin that he won it in 2016. It's definitely a competitive state. Both parties want it. Some people say it could become the next Virginia, because you saw Virginia is another southern state, used to be solidly Republican, shifted to the Democrats, they reliably win it. You saw, Republicans occasionally win there. But it's mainly a Democratic state. So people are thinking, what if Georgia becomes like Virginia? What if Georgia trends Democrat? Because yes, you saw Georgia barely vote to the right of the nation. It voted more right of the nation in 2020 than in 2024. So yes, it did trend right in 2024, not by the amount that Republicans should be happy about. Now, Republicans can still win Georgia, absolutely. They've done it before. But Democrats also could as well. Very realistically, Democrats could absolutely win Georgia. It's a very competitive state. Now, how do I think the election is going to go? Well, it really depends on who the candidates are. I always talk about how candidate quality matters, divisive primaries matters. That's a lot about how I weigh into it, plus the national environment. Now, I'm currently rating this race as leans to tilt Republican. You could tell I have the Republicans just slightly favored, just because they have the incumbency and they have the bench in Georgia. Now, definitely at risk of flipping. Democrats, I think they're running Keisha Lance Bottom. She's probably going to win the primary. But the problem for the Democrats in this situation is that they don't have a lot of high-profile Democrat candidates, right? That seems to be the problem for them. However, if the blue wave is strong enough, Democrats could absolutely win this state. They're not shut out. It'll be very competitive. And yeah, in a best case Democrat scenario, I can absolutely see Democrats winning Georgia by around 4 points. However, or even a tilt margin, tilt Democrat is even possible. However, I'm rating this election as leans to tilt Republican just because of the factors I just mentioned. Plus, they're probably going to run their lieutenant governor, who has proven statewide elective experience, which is Burt Jones. He's probably going to be the nominee. You have Chris Carr, the Attorney General, also statewide elected official, and you have the Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger. I don't think he's as popular within the base of the Republican Party, so he's probably not going to win. But all three of them are decent options because they're all proven statewide elected candidates, If Democrats had this situation, I would give them the slight advantage. I'd say Republicans are still favored in Georgia. However, just because of the blue wave, it's definitely should be on the radar for the Democrats, and I could definitely see it flipping if it happens. So let's move over to the other side of the country. We'll move to Arizona. Um, it is currently held by Democrat Katie Hobbs, the incumbent governor. She won in 2022, defeating Kari Lake, the Republican. Some people say it was a fluke. Some people say it was Roe v. Wade being overturned. A lot of reasons as to why Katie Hobbs was able to just narrowly win the election. But nonetheless, she was able to do it. She flipped it towards the Republican. She flipped it for the Democrats after Republicans had their governorship incumbency with Doug Ducey. He retired. He couldn't run for re-election. So Republicans in 2022 were in a similar situation as Republicans are with Georgia now. However, Republicans didn't run a statewide elected candidate. They ran Katie Hobbs. Kari Lake. Yeah, and she lost to Katie Hobbs. She was the Secretary of State. Secretary? I think she was. One of those offices. She was able to win it, but she was a statewide elected official. That was a high profile candidate. Some say she didn't ran the best campaign, but she was able to win it and defy the odds, even though she wasn't ahead in the polling. So she was able to win by a tilt Democrat margin in Arizona. However, let's just say in this situation, if the Democrats are, they get complacent, they say, "Oh, we have the incumbency," but Republicans give the Democrats a run for their money. Definitely see this race become competitive. You can see Republicans just narrowly win by a leans or tilt Republican margin. However, the problem for the Republicans in this race is that they're having a divided primary. You have David Schweikert, a congressman. You have Carrie Taylor Robson, a businesswoman, and then you have Andy Biggs, another congressman. Very bitter primary. Some of the people in the Republican Party debate about which one is more electable, which one they want more. Primary has become very competitive, and again, that weakens the candidate. However, in this situation, possibly, I'm still rating this election as leans Democrat, just because I'd say Katie Hobbs is favored to win by around 1 point. But in the situation where it's at risk of flipping, Republicans could absolutely take this back. This is a Trump plus 5 or 6 state. I voted for Donald Trump by a lot. You see, Democrats control most of the statewide elected offices, both U.S. Senate offices. However, Republicans control state treasurer and they control the state legislature. So I think the state prefers divided government. It's hard to say, but again, I'm still rating this race as tilt Democratic or leans Democratic, but it's very possible that it flips. It's very possible. So we will move on from there. We'll go up north to Wisconsin. Now, what's happening in Wisconsin is kind of interesting. I touched on this in the past video, so I don't need to talk too much about it. But we have Republicans running Tom Tiffany, and we have Democrats running Mandela Barnes. He's not confident about who the nominees are going to be, but those are the likely nominees in Wisconsin. Now, what makes this race competitive is that, Democrats have done well with the Supreme Court elections. But Wisconsin is truly a purple state, and it really has been for this past, I'd say, 10 years. Because Republicans control one U.S. Senate seat, Democrats control one U.S. Senate seat, Republicans control the state legislature, Democrats control the governorship and the attorney general, I think one more other election race, statewide office, but Republicans control the state treasurer. Very, very purple state. And the thing is, in 2018, blue wave year, the Democrat only won by like a point, which is very, very narrow for a swing state in a blue year. Wisconsin typically just stays tilt. You even saw in 2020 and 2024, Joe Biden and Donald Trump were both able to win the Electoral College. You saw Wisconsin as a tilt margin every time. And even it's just a nature of every purple state, so it would always have to be on this list as number 3. I'm rating this as tilt Democrat. So technically, you haven't seen any flips in this video, but I'm just reviewing states that are at the highest risk of flipping. But if we do see any flips towards the Republicans, because you do see Tom Tiffany is a good Republican candidate, Manila Burns isn't exactly the strongest candidate for the Democrats. You could absolutely see this race go Republican. You could by a leans or tilt Republican margin. Again, I'm still rating it as tilt Democrat, but you never know. We'll have to see what happens. And then move on right east, one more to Michigan. You have, again, I did a video about this. I encourage you to check that out. I did one about Michigan, which basically makes this race truly competitive is that it is a wild card. You have Republicans running John James, you have Democrats running Jocelyn Benson, and you have the independent Mike Duggan. He could potentially make this election similar to how Ross Perot did in the 1990s, where you take a lot of votes from both parties. You see, he's a very popular mayor. He was a Democrat, so he's expected to take a lot of votes from the Democrat, Jocelyn Benson, which is not particularly great for her, I would say. John James is able to, he's already a congressman from the eastern part of the state, competitive part of the state, and he has appeal in western Michigan. He'll probably unite his base. I think Mike Duggan will take some votes away from John James, but not as much as Jocelyn Benson. Benson is a strong candidate. She won by a lot in 2022. So I can't take that away. I definitely think that Benson could win, but I'm actually giving this as a narrow win for John James just because of the three-party election. It could really make this competitive. This is how I see it. And then move on to number one, which is Kansas. It is currently held by Laura Kelly, the Democrat incumbent governor. She is term limited, so she cannot run for re-election. Actually, she's term limited. Her lieutenant governor doesn't really seem interested in running to succeed her, which makes this race kind of like a flip. It's probably going to be a leans to likely. If blue wave is strong enough, you would see it be a leans or tilt, but I'm rating it probably around 5 points. Scott Schwab, their Secretary of State, Republican incumbent Secretary of State, he's running for governor. He will probably be their nominee unless Sharice Davids, the Democrat congresswoman from this area, doesn't run. It'll definitely be a Republican pickup. Republicans typically do well on the state level. It does get competitive for governor, though. That is true. Democrats have had some success. So I could definitely see, blue wave Democrats could possibly make this race competitive or hold on. I just see it as a Republican flip right now, as the most likely race to flip, just because, as I explained, Democrats aren't really favored in Kansas. It'll probably be a flip. You'll see Republicans flip Kansas for the Republicans. Kind of like how you saw Democrats flip Maryland and Massachusetts in 2022. You just had popular Republican governors, but they were kind of the exception to the rule. Similar case with Laura Kelly in Kansas, or say Andy Beshear in Kentucky. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed this video. Hopefully you got something out of it. Hopefully this explains maybe some more into what I view as the most interesting governor's elections. If you were able to see any of these races flip, this is what it would be. You would see Georgia as a Democrat flip, Arizona as a Republican flip, Wisconsin as a Republican flip, and Michigan as a Democrat flip. You would definitely see it similar to that. I also included Nevada as a Democrat flip just because if we went past 5, Nevada would be the 6th most competitive. But I already made a video about Nevada, so make sure to check that out. But again, thanks for watching this video. Please like and subscribe. Hope you have a good day, and I'll see you in the next video.